Yo, welcome back to the BST4 channel. We know what's going on, what's happening, man. Listen, thank you guys for checking out the channel. I do appreciate it. Click the like button, click the subscribe button, and check out some more videos coming up. And make sure you ding the bell to get more notifications on new videos coming up. All right, we're talking about the Mustang. Why did it get bigger and bigger in the 70s? In the middle with you. Well, my guru, Carl Shelby, will explain. But why is the Mustang 2 the second generation? They skipped 2 generations, kind of like the missing link with human. There's a couple of generations that's missing. Let's talk about this Mustang from the Trans Am series, one of my favorite looking Mustangs. I think you agree. I don't mind this size. It shouldn't have never got no bigger than this. But we'll let this guy talk about this Trans Am Mustang here.
In '69, they tried really making a stab. They got Carcraft involved and they built the first Boss cars. They were actually R-Code cars, which were Cobra Jet cars. Well, in 1970, with money for only one team, Bud Moore got the nod. Shelby was out the door.
Whoa, hold up. Say that again?
Team Bud Moore got the nod. Shelby was out the door.
No. Say that again.
Team Bud Moore got the nod. Shelby was out the door.
All right, now I'm going to have to bring Carroll Shelby and let him defend himself on what really happened. And then he'll further explain why he later declined on this Trans Am series.
I didn't miss anything in the automobile industry because one of the reasons I was so discouraged was because we had emissions and safety coming on. The Mustangs that I was building, Ford didn't have anything else coming along that we could build a decent car out of to race. They were talking, this Trans Am thing was kind of a farce, and as far as I'm concerned.
Didn't last very long, did it?
It didn't last very long, and the factories were halfway in it there for 2 or 3 years, and I didn't care anything about that, taking those cars and running in the Trans Am, and Ford wanted me to do that, and I didn't want to, and so I just lost interest, burnt out, and with emissions and safety coming on, you see what the cars were in the 70s, even the 4-cylinder BMW became the performance car of the 70s with 115 horsepower, I think. So you can see how far down the American industry went, and the Japanese were making big inroads with their little econo boxes, and Detroit said it would never happen, and you could see how many horrible decisions were made in Detroit by everybody in the 70s. So
instead of trying to perfect the Ford Mustang, they were out listening to disco music, buying prostitutes, snorting blow off their breasts. That's what they was doing. That's not what really happened, but let's say this.
He had to save a company that was losing $10 million a month. He began by firing about 1,000 of Bennett's cronies. The most difficult to dislodge was an executive who carried on a perpetual office party behind locked doors. According to legend, Henry Ford smashed it down with a crowbar.
Yeah, well, I didn't smash it down with a crowbar. We just wanted to open it, and it was locked, so we opened it with a crowbar. And when I had my conversation with Bennett, I just wanted to find out where all the rat holes were. So I figured the best way to do is go out and get at them and have a look at them and see what we're going to do about them.
Henry Ford, the automotive gangster. Yeah. Henry Ford I was getting ill at this time. They were stealing money from him, $10 million a month. Franklin D. Roosevelt was considering a government takeover of Ford Company to ensure the continuation of war production. So Henry Ford II left the Navy in July 1943 and joined the company's management, and he left the Navy. So that's fucks stealing money from us. And he was like, yo, y'all fucks take advantage of my ailing grandfather? Like, you sending $10 million and y'all okay with this? Let me show you the house that this Harry Bennett mother made off of that money.
This is the house that Harry Bennett built. It was built on 152 acres of remote wooded lands in southeastern Michigan, and the fortifications designed into it would make even Citizen Kane feel safe. But what would possess someone, even in 1930, to build this kind of fortress? If you knew Harry, you'd know why. Harry's major assignment at that time was to keep the unions out of Ford Motor Company by any means possible. More often than not, those means were violent. Politics made him many enemies, and after repeated attempts were made on his life, he and Henry Ford decided a safe house had to be built.
It's supposed to be a party house. basically. But it also became Bennett's fortress in the respect that he had the gunman up on the roof about 6.
The world's first trap house. Wow. Mr. Ford needed his boys around him at this time, and this guy seeked the opportunity to come in and created that kind of feel for Mr. Ford. So Mr. Ford entrusted him with a lot of things. And also, too, I think this guy perpetuated this whole thing to be bigger, and it got out of hand, and money was involved. I mean, $10 million per month back then, big money right about now. Whole families be wiped out for some money like that. So I think this thing just got crazy. He started to scam Mr. Ford. Mr. Ford said safe house, not a safe castle.
Dens where he kept living lions and tigers and often roamed the catacombs. Harry was quite a joker too. Sometimes he wouldn't tell his guests that the lions were running free.
This part of the story gets really technical. Now, Henry Ford wanted to take a break. After some years being in the president's seat at Ford, he was like, look, man, I just want to chill and just be a chairman and just be a shot caller from behind the scenes. I want somebody else to kind of run the company. He wanted a seasoned vet. He went outside of Ford to go get this guy, Bunky. He became vice president, which he figured that he should have been president over there at GM. So he was a little bit upset that he became vice president. So Ford said, hey, if you come over here, I'll make you president. So that's what he did. Now that causes turmoil within Ford because Lee Iacocca was in Ford since sales. He created so many different systems within Ford that made them money. He was like, look, I'm the go-to guy for this. I got plans. I got things right now on the table that I can put out right now to make us money. And you put this GM guy who was an outsider in before me. So that created turmoil within inside the company. Now the next 69 Mustang was coming out. They made the Boss 302. Now they brought over Larry from GM. Larry is a guy who designed the Stingray. So they helped design the Boss 302. Look, this Mustang has 302, boss. Brilliant, Larry, brilliant. Boom, that's the name of it, Boss 302, done deal. Now Bunky and this guy Larry here set that out. Now that became pretty good. Now this is the part where Carl Shelby was like, hey, look, he didn't want to be bothered because Lee Iacocca wasn't a part of that Ford Mustang. So he said, man, you know what, I'm siding with my boy. And that's what he did. That's the part that he wanted to leave out. Here is the reason why the Mustang got big. Bunky made everything big. Even when he was at GM, he made everything look like a goddamn bird. All those cars that got a little beak to it, that looked like GM cars, or GM cars look like Ford cars, that's because of him. Because when he left GM, some of those cars were still rolling off the shelf, and then he adopted some of that stuff and brought it over to Ford thinking that it would work, and it did not work. You can see the sales at the slump. These Mustangs were not the greatest. They were just too big, and they made them big so they can put big engines in them. People didn't really need big engines. Muscle cars wasn't rocking like that at the time. Everybody wanted small cars, economo cars. Just like my man Carl Shelby said. My man Lee Iacocca had cars ready to go right off the hip. He was not letting them fly while this guy was in office so he can take credit for what was going on. He just waited. 1969, Bunky was fired. In 1970, Lee Iacocca was hired. 1971 Mustang had nothing to do with Lee Iacocca, but they just let it die out. He was more focused on the Pinto, the Maverick, and the Mustang II, which came out in 1974. The gas crisis came in 1973, and the gas crisis came back in 1979. But he was already fired in 1978. Before he left Ford, he pitched the K car and the Caravan, and they didn't bite for him. Ford just wanted him out. He's like, okay, no problem. And he went not to GM, but to Chrysler. And those cars became hits over there. And that's when he brought Carl Shelby over.
And when Iacocca left Ford and went to Chrysler, he asked me to come back over there. And well, when I went there, I went around to the guys in engineering, says, what do we have? And we got 90 horsepower and a low 4-speed gearbox, cable shift gearbox with one track in it. And I said, ooh. Well, within 2 years, we had that little 90 horsepower engine. Now we were pulling 700 horsepower out of that little 2.2 liter engine, building little cars that made a lot of money for the company. They were little nothings, little $7,500 cars, but eventually that led us to the Viper, which turned the image of Chrysler around.
And you guys turned that company around. And I thank you guys for watching this video in its entirety, man. Thank you guys for the support, man. I appreciate it, man. We'll check you guys out on the flip side. See ya.
Start building some small cars. Get better fuel economy. Start with there. But that seems so obvious. Why haven't they done that?
Well, they weren't ready for $4 gas. In fact, Charlie, we weren't ready for $2 gas. You know, it's not that easy to just flip it. And cars, the SUVs took off like another phenomenon. They're heavy, 7,000, 8,000 pounds, get lousy fuel economy, pollute the air. But the public really is still buying them in smaller sizes. So, you know, you just got to hit the mark. You can't always have a Mustang hit or a minivan hit. You know, those are home runs. But in the end, you got to make cars that people like. They got to look nice. They got to be reliable. They got to have good warranties on them. And they haven't lost their way. I mean, Toyota's a strong, formidable competitor, but the problem is healthcare costs and pensions. You know, it's just awful. Classic.
I want to come back to that, but let me just talk about the cars themselves, and we'll talk about the burden of health care or how to deal with that issue, which is part of the reason that Daimler-Benz wanted to get rid of them, I suspect.
Yeah.
You believe that American car companies can compete effectively with car companies around the world?
If they get their arm around healthcare costs and pensions. They can't compete if it's still an albatross of $1,300, Toyota's $200 for healthcare per car. General Motors is $1,500.
Right.
If you don't get that down, you can't tell the customer, I got to pay for the legacy costs of retirees, and it's going to cost you an extra $1,300 to buy my GM car. You can't do that over time. So that's got to be corrected somehow.
And how would you correct
collaboration of government?
Government has to bail them out?
And the unions got to come to their senses. We can't build cars at $60 an hour. We just can't do it.
So what do you say to the unions? You got to make what compromise?
Yeah, they got to, in September they come up for a big contract. They got to make some concessions. They have to.
Concessions on what concessions would you ask them to make?
Costs.
What would you ask them that they that was part of the contract they had with the automobile company that they now must forego?
That their union member will have to pay more of the cost, whether it's deductibles, whatever it is. He's got to share more in the cost of health care. You know, the union lobbied hard, and we gave them. We never took a strike. You know, it was too expensive, so we knuckled under, and we did that to ourselves. That's got to be corrected. It can't be done overnight, but it's got to be corrected.
And if the unions say no, what happens?
I think it would. The survival of the auto industry would be at stake. I really do.
Is Toyota, which is now the world's largest automobile company?
Yeah, they went by GM for a while, and they may stay there for a while.
What is it they have done right beyond health care as a company?
They came to the U.S., put a lot of money here, have no unions, by the way.
Right.
Their cost base is different.
Right. So that's one thing, big thing.
Yeah,
but they designed cars that people wanted to buy.
Well, yes, they did. But so did the other big three. They did do a great thing. They bet the farm really on these hybrids.
Right.
They built about not too many, 250,000 of them so far. But they have the reputation that they are good engineers and they build good cars. You can't take that away from them.
Suppose Chrysler had understood the appeal of hybrids and fuel-efficient cars. Would it be a much more vital company today?
Probably. At Ford, I did work on hybrids 25 years ago.
Yeah. And found it was not cost efficient.
Right, too complex.
Gas was too
costly.
cheap. And gas was too cheap.
Gas was $1,
right.
Charlie. You know, now we're hovering at $4. You know, Europe's used to $4 gas, $5, $6 gas.
Yeah.
But we're not.
Something that moves us all forward and holds nothing back. The all-electric Mustang Mach-E. The newest member of the family.
Carol Shelby Carl. I can't do this, man. It sounds more manly. Carl Shelby.